When you need to build up your team to handle the growing chaos at work, use Indeed Sponsored Jobs. It gives your job post the boost it needs to be seen and helps reach people with the right skills, certifications, and more. Spend less time searching and more time actually interviewing candidates who check all your boxes. Listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. That's Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Need a hiring hero? This is a job for Indeed Sponsored Jobs.
The homeland of the primordial beings. Exploring the Egyptian beliefs surrounding the origin of the primordial island, referred to at the beginning of the Edfu records, provides a fascinating look into their mythological understanding of creation. Egyptian tradition deeply embeds this island, known as the Island of the Egg, as the birthplace of the earth itself. From these records, we can piece together an extensive cosmogonical narrative. The Egyptians believed in a first time, an age that predated all, known as the early primeval age. One of the ancient texts mentions a sacred book of the early primeval age of gods, which likely contained myths about the creation and the island's divine significance. It's thought this book included stories of the island's first divine inhabitants, mysterious beings without form, who laid the foundation for the earth. They regarded these nameless and shapeless beings as the island's original inhabitants, existing before the gods we know from later Egyptian mythology. The Edfu records suggest that this Island of the Egg, an enduring and sacred place, may have been the source from which the land of Egypt itself descended. According to these texts, the primordial waters receded, revealing a muddy island brought forth by a nameless creative power. This island then served as the birthplace of the gods and creation itself, populated by the primeval ones. The Egyptian texts describe these beings as the most aged ones, ancestors of all other gods, embodying creation in its earliest form. These beings were not single individuals but a collective force. They were the initial creators, self-generating, without parental guidance, and the source from which all other entities sprang. People perceived their form as vague and undefined, yet powerful. This lack of physical shape symbolized the unformed, boundless potential of the early universe. Interestingly, they are depicted as beings who existed before light and radiation were born, almost like divine energy awaiting material form. Further into the Edfu inscriptions, there's mention of the builder gods who emerged from this sacred land, described as both fathers who fertilized and mothers who gave birth. They embodied fertility and creation, producing offspring without traditional means. These beings were considered to have introduced light, warmth, and illumination to the world, bridging the gap between a dark, primordial realm and a world filled with life. They were believed to have created light through sheer will, an impressive concept in Egyptian myth. The Edfu texts also recount that the first forms the primeval ones took were of bulls and cows, symbolizing fertility and life. This imagery of livestock highlights the Egyptians' association of creation with birth and sustenance, as these animals provided vital resources. The forms of the bull and cow suggest that the Egyptians viewed these primordial beings as the origin of all generative power, essential to human survival and prosperity. The inscriptions even describe these beings as the Great Ennead, a collective of ancient gods who created the physical forms of later gods and governed the divine processes of creation and illumination. People believed them to embody male and female aspects, implying a balance of forces during creation. In this portrayal, they did not exist solely as deities of one gender, but as a blend, initiating life in various forms. The idea of self-creation and self-generation is a recurring theme in Egyptian cosmogony. People believed these beings created themselves, emerging from the void without parental guidance. This concept, reflecting mystery and power, illustrates an early understanding of creation as a spontaneous, self-sustaining process. The Egyptian tradition reflects that existence emerged from nothingness, an endless cycle of creation and renewal without beginning or end. The Edfu records paint a picture of an ancient mythic landscape that combined elements of physical fertility with the abstract spiritual concept of creation. People saw the primeval ones as the foundational beings who shaped the early universe, constructing the sacred domains and creating life. The inscriptions suggest dividing these beings into two generations: the earliest, most mysterious ones, and a later group that assumed more concrete roles in shaping creation. In the end, the story of the primeval ones offers a profound insight into how the ancient Egyptians envisioned the beginning of all things. The sacred island emerged from chaotic waters, became the birthplace of divine beings, and laid the groundwork for the gods and the world. This myth encapsulates the Egyptian understanding of creation as a physical and a spiritual event, encompassing life, light, and divine mystery. Through these texts, the Egyptians left a legacy that reflects their awe at the mysteries of existence and the divine powers they believed governed the cosmos. Ancient Egyptian sources suggest a significant period between the emergence of the primordial island and the creation of the rest of the world. During this period, life was believed to have developed on the island. After completing the initial phases of creation, the Egyptians imagined that the primeval ones lived near pools containing the lotus and continued their creative work. These nameless creative powers established their home on the island, depicted simply as the bare edges of the pools. This home of the creators was considered a sacred domain, representing a distinct stage in the mythological history of Egyptian sacred places. The existence of this home of the primeval ones appears to have been finite, eventually fading into darkness. The first significant event believed to have occurred in this home dates back to creation. This likely alludes to the origin of the subsequent generation of gods, described in sources as the Kas of the primeval ones, or the generation of the Great Shining One. The Egyptian concept was that the Island of the Egg housed two generations of creators during its earliest period. Only after fulfilling the general phases of creation did the latter generation take birth on the island. Accepting this view, we can suggest that the Island of the Egg, the original domain of the most aged ones, was the birthplace of the succeeding generation of creators, their hin or homeland. The word, the Wa'aret, likely a part of this sacred area, appears in the textual evidence supporting this interpretation. One of the Edfu texts reveals that the new generation of creators was born in the waters of the Wa'aret before coming onto land. At this primordial stage, the only solid land was the island itself, suggesting that references to the land pertain to the actual island of creation. In another tradition, the term describes the part of the island containing the pools from which the new divine generation emerged after the creation of radiance. People regarded this place, the birthplace of the creators, as the most sacred part of the first primordial domain of the gods. We describe Kas's initial form as that of the second generation of creators. We are still determining the exact nature of this form. Sources suggest an early equating of these Kas with bulls and cows, but it remains uncertain if this was a widely held belief. The original form of the Kas varied across local traditions and beliefs, influenced by their perceived creative roles and associations with local deities. The Hermopolitan doctrine links the Ogdoad with these primordial Kas, often called the Pawpaw. Conversely, in Memphis, the Shebtu and the Sages share similar statuses, being identified as the MSW Tianai, children of Tannin, and the progeny of the Creator. There are reasonable grounds to assume that these Kas replaced the shapeless creators of earth and radiance. The latter continued the work of creation primarily by expanding the original island and forming the rest of the world. It was believed that the creative capacity of the most aged ones ceased with the arrival of the new generation of creators. While present on the Island of the Egg, the original natural forces no longer appeared active. The Hermopolitan version of creation places the sun god's birth in the primordial island pool, marking the beginning of the second generation of creators. An Edfu text reveals that they were the fathers and mothers of the august stripling, creating him to complete their number as the 10th god. Given that radiance already existed, two interpretations are possible. Either the primeval ones endowed the radiance element with the form of a god, or this reflects a modified version of the original myth. It's plausible that interpreting the origin of radiance as the birth of the sun god was specifically a Hermopolitan tradition. Only in texts that equate the original pool with the sacred pool of Hermopolis and identify the primordial powers with the Ogdoad does the birth of the sun god replace the origin of radiance, as the Edfu evidence makes clear. These texts also refer to the original island as the Island of the Two Flames. The differing names assigned to the island suggest that the Hermopolitan myth about the sun god's birth was based on an earlier tradition. Several Edfu texts interpret radiance's origin as the sun god's birth within the lotus. One of the Edfu scenes of offering the lotus contains the following invocation. This august god emerged from Nun within the lotus and came into existence in the great pool. In Hermopolitan tradition, after emerging from Nun, the sun god assumed the power to create the world, the gods, and humankind. It was believed that, when he opened his eyes, he illuminated the two lands, dividing night from day. The gods issued from his mouth, and men from his eyes. Everything attains being in him. An inscription on the inner face of the enclosure wall includes an extract from similar teachings. When the egg was created, they opened its interior within the lotus, and Re, as a youth, was between the two mistresses. He embodies Khepri, even Ptah, who initiated his creation. Slumber shall pass away when the light comes forth from him, even the child. He burned everything around him with his two flaming eyes from the Island of the Two Flames. This text suggests that the sun god succeeded to the throne of the eldest ones, and his father entrusted him with the decree to create humanity, the gods, and all living beings. In the Hermopolitan tradition, the throne of the eldest ones resembles the tradition of the Hin, or homeland. This suggests a belief in the transfer of creative powers from one generation of creators to another, with the birthplace of the new generation, in this case, the sun god, regarded as the center from which all acts of creation originated. Interestingly, the creation order places the terrestrial world last. Again, the account merely references the Earth's emergence from the primordial waters without describing Earth's substance's creation. This text is among the few that explains how the Egyptians imagined the Earth emerging from Nun, through the radiance of the sun god, who was believed to dry up the water around his primordial seat. Thus, the Hermopolitan doctrine conceived the creation of the terrestrial world as the Earth's emergence, a process resulting from solar activity. Significantly, people believed that the sun god operated from his birthplace, which also served as the origin of the cause, his creators. This supports the hypothesis that foundational ground was a prerequisite for the world's creation. It confirms that this Hin, the homeland, the pool with the lotus, the very spot of creation within the island, was considered the most sacred part of the primordial domain of gods. The description of this as the sun god's throne suggests that it is his private domain. It's possible that the concept of the primordial throne of God was a distinctly Hermopolitan tradition, as this view is known only from parts of the myth showing strong Hermopolitan influence. The myth described the Ogdoad as the rulers of the throne of the primeval ones. Another text describes this primordial throne as the lotus that the sun god rested on. Therefore, people believed that the island of the egg was the first sacred domain of gods in the early primeval age. In this myth, the creator of the world and all living beings, the sun god, shared this primordial sacred domain with other, earlier creative powers. The sun god first issued radiance in this sacred domain, initiated the primeval ones, and gave birth to their successor, who then assumed the power to create the rest of the world. The description of this place as the throne likely led the Egyptians to envision it as a real, albeit primitive, sacred site. They likely imagined that at the center of this domain or homeland was the lotus, the first seat of the world's creator, with the two earlier generations of creators assembled around it, the nameless powers and their Kas. The Egyptians did not envision the place of creation as one where an omnipotent creator reigned alone. Instead, a pre-existing creative power brought him out of Nun, and he lived on the island with other divine beings who performed the actual work of creation, likely under his command. The evidence from the scenes of offering the lotus and related inscriptions presents a coherent picture of the homeland of the primordial deities on the island of creation. This conception of the primordial land, or homeland, may have a realistic background, reflecting the appearance of a very primitive, sacred place, as it might have existed in the distant past of prehistoric Egypt. One remarkable fact that emerges from the Edfu accounts is the association between a primitive cult place and the concept of the initial spot on Earth where the world began. In this creation story, we can trace a series of creative acts described as mythical events, culminating at a specific moment in the primordial age with the creation of the sacred domain of the Creator. The theory supporting the cult of the Creator suggests that several sacred domains in early Egyptian history shared a common belief in the existence of the Creator's sacred place. The sacred places of proto-dynastic Egypt may have shared this belief, each claiming to be the original island that founded the first sacred realm. Ancient Egyptian texts offer insights into varying interpretations of the original world of the gods, formulated across regions other than Hermopolis. While none of these versions describes the initial island as extensively as the Edfu texts, they share a central idea: that a primordial island emerged at the beginning of the world, marking the first sacred domain. This theme is consistent across Egyptian mythology, suggesting a shared concept of an origin point for creation. In the Heracleopolitan version, Heracleopolis claims to be the first place where the Creator set foot on land, making it the primordial region from which the Creator subsequently fashioned the world. Similarly, the Theban tradition speaks of an original place that emerged from the primordial waters of Nun. In this sacred space, the Creator manifested, creating other lands as dwellings for the gods. The Creator then gave life to other beings, thereby establishing the world of the gods. These explanations, whether from Hermopolis, Heracleopolis, or Thebes, reveal a similar ideological foundation, each describing the unique domain from which creation unfolded. This original place is another name for the primordial island described in Egyptian creation myths. The first Edfu cosmogonical record mentions an island at the beginning, which likely corresponds to the Island of the Egg, despite not explicitly equating the two. The Edfu tradition refers to this island as the Island of Trampling, Titi, a belief that divine beings inhabited it before the creation of the lands. The variety of names for the island across different traditions, each influenced by local myths, implies a shared belief in a single primordial island as the heart of creation. The surviving Edfu records do not preserve the specific origins of the Island of Trampling, but the descriptions bear enough similarities to suggest that the same primordial forces formed it as the Island of the Egg. The analysis of the Edfu record reveals parallels in the appearance and essence of these islands, each containing a still pool considered the birthplace of creation. In the Island of the Egg, this pool held the lotus that carried the sun god, a symbol of self-creation. Although the pool on the Island of Trampling isn't explicitly described in origin, it appears as an edge of reeds, believed to bear the title Elevated Seat of the God, Wages Netter, possibly arising from events associated with it in the island's later history. In this reed-covered landscape stood a pillar called Made of Reeds, which served a purpose similar to that of the lotus in the Island of the Egg. It supported a divine being, providing an uplifter of the god. Although this god is not the sun god, his presence on the Jed pillar suggests a similar foundational role in creation. Known only as Pan, this one, his Bia, spiritual essence, and Ka, life force, were the active elements in creation, symbolizing the primordial spirit and vitality shaping the cosmos. The creation scene continues with other symbolic figures arriving at this sacred place, depicted as possessing unique, ancient objects known as DT, Wejet, and Tai. Modern scholarship must fully understand these objects, but they represent the early creative powers that established Earth's initial landmass. Ancient Egyptians believed these nameless forces brought the first solid Earth into existence by creating an embryo of the Earth.
Your call has been forwarded to voicemail.
Hi, this is Zoe Deutsch.
And Nick Robinson. Our brand new movie, Voicemails for Isabel, is all about those little moments that feel like the universe is looking out.
Feeling homesick, then your sister calls.
Hearing that perfect song exactly when you need it. Sometimes life rigs things in our favor, like learning about your new favorite rom-com, Voicemails for Isabel. Now playing only on Netflix.
Study and play come together on a Windows 11 PC. And for a limited time, college students get the best of both worlds. Get the Unreal College Deal. Everything you need to study and play with select Windows 11 PCs. Eligible students get a year of Microsoft 365 Premium and a year of Xbox Game Pass Ultimate with a custom color Xbox wireless controller. Learn more at windows.com/student offer. While supplies last. Ends June 30th. Terms at aka.ms/collegepc.
Once their creative task was complete, these powers assumed a more stable and specific form, becoming less active when the second generation of creators took over. This generational transition reflects a belief in distinct phases of creation, with each generation of divine beings assuming different creative roles. In the Hermopolitan tradition, the story of creation progresses with the birth of the sun god, believed to emerge from a pool on the Primordial Island. According to one Edfu text, the sun god was the child of the father and mother gods of the August stripling, becoming the 10th god and completing their divine order. We could interpret this addition of the sun god as giving a physical form to an already existing radiance element, possibly representing a Hermopolitan variation on the original creation myth. The text suggests that the sun god's birth and emergence from Nun signify a transformation of radiance into a godly form, introducing a distinct Hermopolitan influence into the narrative. The scene known as Offering the Lotus symbolizes the sun god emerging from within a lotus, as further described in the Edfu texts. This August god emerged from Nun within the lotus and came into existence in the great pool. After his emergence, the sun god assumed the power of creation, bringing forth the gods, humans, and all life. According to one account, the sun god opened his eyes, illuminating the two lands and separating day from night. The description portrays the sun god as the source of all existence, emanating the gods from his mouth and humanity from his eyes. An inscription on the inner face of the enclosure wall echoes this notion. The two protective deities opened the egg's interior within the lotus upon its creation, and Re, in his youth, stood between the two mistresses. He embodies Khepri, even Ta, who initiated his creation. Slumber shall pass away when the light comes from him, even the child. He burned everything around him with his two flaming eyes from the island of the two flames. In this account, the sun god assumes the throne of the eldest ones, receiving from his predecessor the command to create humankind, the gods, and all living beings. This throne closely resembles the concept of Hin, homeland, implying that the birthplace of the sun god in Hermopolitan tradition served as the origin of creation. Egyptian cosmogony frequently depicts the terrestrial world as the final creation, sparingly mentioning its emergence from Nun. According to this account, the sun god's radiance dried the primordial waters to create the earth, reflecting the Hermopolitan belief that solar energy was the source of terrestrial creation. The sun god's birthplace was also considered the origin of the Ka's, creator spirits, reinforcing the belief that a foundational sacred ground was essential to the world's creation. The island's sacred domain confirms the Hin, a pool containing the lotus, as the holiest spot. The description of this birthplace of the sun god as his next throne likely reflects the Hermopolitan concept of the primordial throne of the gods, a notion unique to this tradition. People often referred to the Ogdoad, 8 primordial deities, as rulers of the throne of the primeval ones, emphasizing the origin of the god's authority from this foundational seat. In the Egyptian worldview, the Island of the Egg, or, in Hermopolis, the Island of Trampling, represents the first sacred domain, with the sun god sharing this primordial realm with other creative powers. This sacred space was the source of radiance, the birthplace of the primeval ones, and the site where their successor, the sun god, assumed creative authority over the rest of the world. The Egyptians likely envisioned this sacred domain as a tangible yet elemental place, a primitive sanctuary from which creation unfolded, based on its description as a notary or throne. At its center lay the lotus, the creator's seat, surrounded by 2 earlier generations of deities, the nameless powers and their cause. The Edfu texts clarify that the Egyptians did not conceive of this primordial place as ruled by a solitary creator. Instead, the sun god emerged from Nun under the guidance of a pre-existing creative force and coexisted with other deities who enacted creation at his behest. The descriptions in the offering of the lotus scenes suggest a coherent vision of the homeland of the primordial gods, as if reflecting the atmosphere of a primitive sacred site in a prehistoric Egyptian landscape. The Edfu accounts, therefore, associate the idea of a primeval cult site with the concept of the initial earth, marking the world's beginning. In this cosmogonic myth, we can trace a sequence of creation acts, mythological events that, in a specific moment of the primordial age, culminated in establishing the Creator's sacred realm. This belief in the Creator's sacred site was likely widespread across early Egyptian sacred domains. Proto-dynastic Egypt may have regarded various holy sites as the original islands from which creation emerged, each laying claim to being the birthplace of the first sacred realm. This concept highlights a shared reverence for a divine origin, with each sacred place symbolically linked to the birthplace of the gods. The Island of Trampling, the foundation of creation. The Edfu texts present compelling evidence that the Island of Trampling was the primordial land on which the drama of creation began. Examining the physical description of this island, it is clear that, like other mythical islands, it featured a still body of water regarded as the birthplace of creation. In the case of the Island of the Egg, this was a pool that held the sun god, a symbol of self-creation. The description of the pool on the Island of Trampling as a jesnib, an area or edge of reeds, suggests a reed-covered pool on the island's margin despite the lack of detail in its origin. People named this pool Wajaset Neder, the elevated seat of the god, most likely due to events associated with it during the island's later phases. At the center of this reed field stood a divine resting place, symbolized by a J-pillar made of reeds. This pillar had a function similar to the lotus in the Island of the Egg, serving as a sacred platform for God. Another sacred symbol, a reed known as the D-Bell perch, could replace it. The surviving texts only fully describe the god Pan, this one, believed to rest upon these Jed pillars. The new era of creation on the island began through his Bai, spiritual essence, and Ka, vital force. The text suggests that this reed pool on the Island of Trampling, representing the creation's origin, is central to the narrative preserved in the Edfu cosmogony. The arriving at the field of reed record introduces 2 sacred symbols, the member of the progenitor and the image of the arm. These symbols, unique to this text, represent the mysterious creative powers associated with the initial formation of the Earth's matter. They were embodiments of the nameless forces that shaped the island and represented the original substance or energy that laid the foundation of creation. The Egyptians believed these primordial powers initially lacked definite form, acting only as pure creative energy in the early stages. Once they completed their task, these forces took on more concrete forms, though they no longer actively participated in the creative acts led by the new generation of gods. This suggests that their role was bound to a particular phase, after which they resided passively in the island's sacred ground, embodied in the land they had formed. Our sources indicate that the Egyptians considered these original creators' physical form, DT, to have attained divinity. Their DT embodiment became sacred within the sacred mounds of the earth, a concept that may have replaced the original island's name in later traditions. The Edfu texts occasionally interchange the terms island and mound, indicating that they refer to the same foundational land. This divinization may reflect a transformation believed to have occurred when the original powers ended their active phase, entering a divine state in the island's land. On the Island of Trampling, the member of the progenitor and the image of the arm seem to signify the continued presence of the original creative forces at the creation's starting point. These symbols could have represented the most sacred elements within the homeland of the primeval ones. Their presence on the island enabled additional acts of creation. In fact, they invoked the image of the arm before initiating a new phase of Earth's formation, thus connecting these symbols with the creation process. The Edfu texts thus hint at how the Egyptians conceived the final appearance of the original creators. Abstract symbols enshrined within the land, bearing creative power even after their active period had ended. In this regard, the symbols in the reed field prove that the Island of Trampling was indeed the primordial island of creation, housing the nameless powers whose energy continued to reside within its sacred ground. The formation of Earth received particular attention during the creation process on the Island of Trampling. The symbols representing the original powers seem essential to this, as seen in the scene where the image of the arm was invoked before the Earth's creation began anew. This aligns with the Egyptian concept of a process through which the creators imbued the Earth's elements with power, suggesting that they engaged in a symbolic, almost ritualistic creation. Sacred spells were believed to endow the symbols of Earth with special power, enabling the Earth to manifest along the island's edges. This creation method, unique to the Edfu tradition, contrasts with the Hermopolitan concept, where the Earth emerged as the primordial waters dried up. Symbolic invocation and solar energy achieved the same result, manifesting what the nameless powers had initially formed but left hidden beneath the waters. The Edfu accounts emphasize that Earth's creation was not a single event, but occurred in stages. Earth's substance came into existence through a physical, organic act. Then, in a second phase, this pre-existing substance surfaced from the waters, with variations in the method depending on the location of the creation myth's development. This two-phased approach may explain why most Egyptian cosmogonical texts describe the Earth's origin as an emergence from water, rather than a singular act of creation. This reflects a nuanced understanding of creation as a layered process, where divine acts gradually brought initial, raw material into form, culminating in the sacred landscape the Egyptians believed held the origins of the world. The Edfu texts suggest that the creation of the Earth on the Island of Trampling was primarily symbolic, reflecting the idea that the original creative powers were present as representations rather than active forces. Since the foundational work of creation was complete, their presence was primarily required for the next phase of Earth's formation. The island's creation paved the way for establishing sacred sites, the first holy spaces for the gods, from which enclosures and later temples emerged. The Island of Trampling, therefore, held the role of foundation ground, often referred to as the unit of the ruler of the wing, affirming its purpose as the starting point of creation. The Island of Trampling and the Island of the Egg share a pool at their core, a symbolic space where the creative process unfolds, demonstrating their close connections. Both islands also featured a primordial mound known as the High Hill. The Island of the Egg myth incorporates a similar mound, known as Wir, in the Edfu texts. This mound, brought forth by divine command, represented a secondary terrestrial formation and was central to subsequent creative acts. People believed that divine beings inhabited the Island of Trampling before the land's full creation. Unlike the Kas on the Island of the Egg, the inhabitants of the Island of Trampling were known as J1JSW, a somewhat obscure group whose specific nature remains unclear. The deity Pan, this one, who rested on the JD pillar within the reed pool and governed the area while surrounded by lesser-known divine entities, may have been associated with them. In this myth, the Pan god is unique. The Edfu inscriptions and other specific references are the only sources of knowledge about the Pan god, portraying him as a dirty falcon associated with creation. Unlike the sun god on the lotus in the Island of the Egg, the Pan god does not directly act in creation. His Bayan Ka, spiritual essence and life force, plays crucial roles when a new creation phase begins. Alongside Pan, two other divine figures appear. Traditionally, people associate the deity Iftar Bear with a sacred spear of Horus, but in this context, they describe him as another figure residing on a jed pillar of reeds, possibly symbolizing a protective role in the island's creation myth. Later texts regard Iftar Bear as a god who repels evil from the mansion of the god, though little is known of his form beyond his armless depiction. Here, we describe the second figure, Nefer Bear, often associated with Ptah in later mythology, as the ruler of the wing, a title indicating his protective association with the JD pillar. Later recognition of him as a great god suggests a connection between the island's myth of creation and the realm of falcon-like deities in Egyptian cosmogony. Texts accompanying ritual scenes at the Edfu temple depict the sages, believed to assume falcon forms within their native Wakret, primordial region, and predict the world's creation. The pillars on this wall, resembling the Jed pillar on which Pan and Iftar were arrested, serve as the resting places of falcon deities. The Wakret and the reed pool on the Island of Trampling may represent the same primeval region, envisioned as a reed-filled field. People imagined the earliest bird-like deities to reside here, tying reed stalks together to create a primitive J-pillar as a resting place. This vision may capture one of Egypt's earliest forms of sacred worship, an open field enclosure where falcons, symbolic creators, dwelled, centered around the Jed pillar. This pillar likely represented an early symbolic throne, rooting the falcon gods as protectors and creators, in line with Egyptian myth's evolving tradition of divine sanctuaries. The high antiquity of the Jed pillar domain may explain the connection between the falcon realm and the idea of the creator's dwelling place. This connection offers convincing proof that people envisioned the birthplaces of certain divine beings as the earliest sacred sites where the primordial gods rested. Here, the myth of the Island of Trampling reveals ideas paralleling those found in the myth of the Island of the Egg. This birthplace of the gods, a sacred domain of the Jed pillar and J pillar, likely holds a significance comparable to the Hermopolitan pool with the lotus. This portrayal of the ancient sacred site strengthens the hypothesis that Egyptians envisioned the spot of creation as an authentic yet primitive shrine for the creator. In the Island of Trampling myth, there is another deity associated with the falcon's domain, the Earthmaker, who resided in the reed fields among other deities, including two water deities known as the Divine of Heart and creator of the primeval water, as well as two protectors, SBMBR and Pi Same. These deities are unique to this myth and seem closely tied to the earth god. The Edfu account might represent a modified version of the original creation myth, where the Earthmaker and his companions took the place of the second divine generation of the Island of the Egg, given that the Earthmaker lived where another creator was present. The Earthmaker is notably associated with Entry Ib, the Divine of Heart, though this figure differs from the Divine Heart of Re, identified as Thoth. The Edfu text needs a comprehensive depiction of this Divine of Heart, despite his probable initial residence on the Island of Trampling and connection to the Shebtu creators. The Edfu text credits the Divine of Heart with creating MW water, but it doesn't elaborate further once the Shebtu appears, implying his reverence as a symbolic ancestor god during the early stages of creation. We describe the deities accompanying the earth god as intangible entities residing in the reed field, and they appear distinct from the original powers of the Island of the Egg. This narrative safeguards the heritage of an ancient sacred site honoring the creators of earth and water. The Edfu account thus allows us to reconstruct a picture of this third sacred domain within Egypt's cosmogonical history, a site that may date back to the primeval age. The narrative reveals that the Earthmaker, Irti, resided with his companions in a reed-constructed domain. The description suggests a basic sacred space where a night shelter shielded the symbols of the progenitor. The Earthmaker's residence, known as the BWT-ISDN, Mansion of Isden, likely had an outer boundary surrounding it. Within it lay sacred emblems associated with him. His mace, BD War, the Great White. The Jed Pillar, the image of the front of the god. While no similar structure has yet been discovered, this description offers a fascinating view of a proto-sacred site, possibly resembling later butt-type mansions crafted from reeds, hinting at the early construction methods of Egyptian holy sites. The depiction of the best ISDN domain features a square reed enclosure, likely situated along the pool's edge, symbolizing the believed residence of the primal creative powers. A simple shelter might have housed the elementary symbols inside this enclosure, creating a space of utmost sanctity. In its center, the J-pillar may have been the Earthmaker's resting place, flanked by the Great White Mace and the image of the front of God. This Edfu depiction suggests a coherent vision of a basic shrine that may have existed in pre-dynastic Egypt. Creatures symbolizing the initial phases of creation inhabited this shrine, constructed from reeds. This sacred space, akin to the mythic islands and enclosures of other creation myths, presents itself as a sanctuary where divine beings first established their cultic worship, a setting that preceded the creation of the broader world. Compared to the Hermopolitan tradition, the Edfu myth has a more pronounced role in the cultist place, sacred space, within the island of creation. This distinction holds particular significance because the earliest known references to a bit mansion about the creator of the earth suggest that this mansion served as the earth god's dwelling during the island's initial phase. Additionally, the sacred mansion of Isden serves as an actual place of worship, storing key symbols. The setting of the mansion of Isden aligns with the structures described in earlier accounts, where the earth god lived not in isolation, but among other creative forces. In the first Edfu myth, the PSWTIW, primeval ones, accompany the sun god. The gray falcons accompany the pan god in the reed field. And in the best mansion, other creators of the primary matter join the earth god. These narratives reveal a broader Egyptian view of the homeland of the primeval ones, a foundational setting populated by diverse creative beings. Though the Edfu texts may appear unique to that temple, it's plausible that these accounts represent a general mythological theory about the early world in which Egyptian gods were believed to originate, dwell, and establish their sacred realms. The Edfu inscriptions imply a mythological tradition that predates recorded history. They indicate two sacred domains existed in a primeval age, predating the earliest historical sacred places. While the Hermopolitan account describes the creator's homeland as a lotus pool surrounded by divine beings, the Edfu account provides a more detailed view of a structured resting place for the creator and his companions, suggesting an evolved concept of these early sacred sites. Unlike the naturally occurring Hermopolitan domain, the Island of Trampling appears as a crafted realm. The Jed pillar of the pen god was likely bound from reeds, and the best enclosure of the Earthmaker was constructed, indicating that these early beings created their resting places after settling on the first land. The narrative of the Earth God's Butt Mansion parallels the sacred reed field with its D-Jed pillar and hints that this memory of a simple cultist place reflects Egypt's earliest conceptions of divine worship. This basic constructed enclosure in the primeval landmarks is the initial house of the god, symbolizing a fundamental aspect of creation. Thus, the best mansion was more than just the earth's abode. it represented part of the creation process itself, reflecting an early belief that the act of fashioning a divine resting place was integral to the creation of the earth. This thorough description of the stages of Earth's creation appears first in the Edfu records to trace the evolutionary steps of Egypt's sacred places. The text underscores the establishment of the earliest cult places on or near land, believed to house the divine symbols of creative powers. Egyptians dedicated their first cult places to worshipping the creator and natural creative forces, suggesting a belief from remote antiquity. Interestingly, the text recounts the creation of the sacred falcons realm and the earth god's domain, implying that these traditions were important within the broader Egyptian religious landscape. As Egyptian religion evolved, traditions surrounding these mythical settings, originally belonging to specific localities, may have diffused to other religious centers. As a result, each cultic center could claim to be the creator's original dwelling place, adapting the myth to fit local needs and traditions. The Edfu text suggests a fascinating developmental arc, from worshipping nameless creative powers to establishing distinct sacred spaces with named deities. For instance, the Pian god symbolizes a primordial, nameless entity, akin to the sun god, implying a localized version of a parallel myth. This tradition describes the Jed Pillar's homeland as a sacred domain, where the party, sacred falcons, are believed to rest. Over time, these nameless powers became associated with specific animate beings, marking a shift toward naming and personifying divine entities. As Egyptian belief progressed, the place of the divine face, indicated by the element Br, became crucial. For instance, the earth god, Ir-Ti, and Ptb-Enwit, creator of the primeval water, embody creative powers through their specific actions, linking their names directly to their roles in forming the earth and water. Their sanctuary likely included light structures or fences designed to protect the divine likenesses within. The Edfu accounts support the notion that belief in the creator's private domain was widespread in prehistoric Egyptian cult places, suggesting these sites were among Egypt's earliest. Local adaptations of this tradition reflect a common ideological framework, with each center claiming to be the creator's original abode. This early concept, particularly through the myth of the Island of Trampling, suggests that each significant religious center viewed itself as the initial sacred site where the creator resided before crafting the world. The myth further indicates that the gods of historical times, including the falcon god and his temples, could trace their domains back to this primordial homeland of the primeval ones. The initial sacred space on the island's edge may have provided the foundation for subsequent divine domains. While creating lands for other gods' domains was not immediate, a prolonged period of darkness separated the creator's original world from forming later sacred territories. In sum, the Edfu texts point to an era when each early Egyptian religious center was seen as the first divine dwelling, predating known historical sanctuaries. The myth of the Island of Trampling exemplifies this evolution, implying that the sacred realms of later gods could only originate from the homeland of the primeval ones. Thus, the texts bridge Egypt's mythic past and its temple traditions. The decline and revival of the primeval island. The fate of the Island of the Egg, after the birth of the sun god and the world's creation, remains largely unexplained in the Hermopolitan doctrine. There is no information about the progression or possible decline of the sun god's seat within the island's pool. In contrast, the Edfu texts provide insights into the sequential phases and ultimate fate of the homeland of the primeval ones, following their establishment on the island and the subsequent flourishing of life there. Although these events primarily reference the Island of Trampling, their broader implications suggest a more universal myth, making it likely that the Edfu records represent a broader tradition rather than a local narrative. The first Edfu cosmogonical record suggests a primordial world already in place, but engulfed in darkness without depicting the island's creation or prior existence. This initial state hints at a theoretical beginning where an ancient world, once created, fell into ruin, forming a foundation for a new creation period focused on resurrection. Hints of a pre-existing mythical world suggest that the Island of Trampling preserved remnants of an earlier existence. During the island's first era, the creator of the earth, the Peen god, and his companions on the Jed pillars possessed sacred domains. If the island established these domains, destroying the creator's domain would be a plausible next step. The island's name, Island of Trampling, evokes a sense of conflict or aggression, implying that a battle or struggle may have occurred. Subsidiary names like Island of Combat and Island of Peace further suggest such events, possibly hinting at a confrontation in which the original inhabitants clashed with a formidable enemy. This conflict may have led to the devastation of both sacred domains, a mythic memory that survives in the Edfu text's description of a fallen sound eye, a symbol possibly representing the central light that once illuminated the island. In this myth, the name, WCRT, given to the waters surrounding the island provides additional clues in other myths, such as the story of Osiris, which depicts the water where Osiris's body was found as a burial place associated with death and darkness. This parallel raises the possibility that following a major conflict, the island may have become a submerged tomb for its original inhabitants. Evidence from the Edfu text suggests that only reeds on the water's surface were initially visible to the new creators, hinting that the island lay hidden beneath the dark waters. In light of this dark scenario, it appears that the Island of Trampling and its inhabitants fell into a symbolic death, with the sound eye or central light extinguished. One of the mythical events in the Edfu record, the place of uniting of the company, may reference this conflict, where the divine beings of the Peen god's company fought and perished. This event could imply that the island served as a battleground and a tomb. The concept of an underworld known as the Underworld of the Soul, DWTNB, located near the Creation Island, aligns with this idea of a burial ground. The Edfu texts describe Osiris, a prominent underworld deity, as joyful and the reposing one within this underworld. Such a burial place could represent a final resting site for the earth god, or the Mesenti, who, as the creator of all things, established and solidified the earth. The Ba of Mesenti, referred to as the preeminent in the underworld of the soul, may represent the enduring soul of this ancient earth god. This myth may link the Ba, spirit, of the earth god to the Peen god, implying that the Peen god was originally an earth god. The Peen god's association with the gray falcon brings to mind the tradition of the sages, falcon-like creators of the earth. This aspect of the myth, where the falcon-like sages create earth, appears unique to the Edfu temple tradition, suggesting a particular regional interpretation. The Edfu narrative reveals that the soul of the earth god re-emerges when the island revitalizes in a new era of creation following its apparent destruction. This resurrected island served as the homeland of the primeval ones, who returned in new forms, symbolizing a reawakening after the original island's tragic downfall. This revival hints at a mythic cycle of death and rebirth, with the island and its sacred inhabitants returning from darkness, symbolizing both decay and resurrection in the Egyptian creation mythos. The Edfu texts hint at the decay of the first mythical world, illustrated by the concept of the relic, IBT, of the Peen god. This relic, presumably the reeds on the island's edges, held significant meaning. Once used to construct divine resting places like the Jed pillar, it remained a symbol of the first sacred domain to perish. Wakrit, meaning reed field, IBT, relic, and underworld of the soul, imply a close connection between the island and a funerary space, a burial ground for a deceased divine being, his ka lingering in the reeds. This tradition tells of a god who emerged from none through a pre-existing power, later perished, and whose soul ascended to the sky, while his material form remained hidden in the underworld. A passage at Edfu describes this concept through the August god, who originated in the great pool as the sun god born from the lotus, whose soul ascended to illuminate the heavens, while the underworld concealed his body. This aligns with the Egyptian belief that even the life of a creator deity was finite, signifying a transition between creation phases. Though the Hermopolitan texts don't imply the sun god's death, the Edfu account suggests that this was a widespread belief. The creator's passing marked the start of a new era in existence. Further evidence of this idea emerges in the first cosmogonical record's mention of entering in that which was in decay. This phrase, associated with the Earthmaker's domain, could imply that the gods who arrived on the island discovered the Earthmaker's enclosure in ruins. The limited lifespan of the PSWTYW, primeval ones, suggests that they underwent burial after completing their creation tasks, with new gods conducting funerary rites in their honor. This belief underscores the death and decay of the first world as a natural part of the divine progression. The Edfu narrative offers a more dramatic portrayal of this event, suggesting a storm that ravaged the sacred domain of the mansion of Isden. The Earth God recounts an encounter with a serpent, the Great Leaping One, NHPWR, a formidable enemy who attacked the Earthmaker, destroying the domain and splitting the ground beneath it. This catastrophic event caused the deaths of the island's original divine residents and left the sacred land in ruins. The company of the JJJSW, perhaps the divine inhabitants of the Jed Pillars, also perished, and darkness covered the island, further attesting to the myth of a destroyed sacred world in the Earth God's domain. This narrative holds similarities to the Osiris myth, where the destruction of a sacred space precedes rebirth, echoing the Heliopolitan belief that the primeval hill becomes both the birthplace and the resting place of the deceased. At the dawn of a new phase, the Edfu story tells of the soul of the creator, referred to as the flying Ba history, returning to the field of reeds, reviving the island, and symbolizing its rebirth. This flying soul reclaims its place in the field of reeds, where the Jed Pillar and divine domains once flourished, bringing life to the sacred space once more. Another remarkable detail is the existence of an underworld associated with the island of creation. In the Edfu myth, this underworld, named DWJTNBA, underworld of the soul, predates the world's creation. While details about this primeval underworld are sparse, it likely arose from the collapse of the creator's domain. During the ensuing darkness, the underworld became the final resting place for the island's first divine inhabitants, located beneath the reeds, where the spiritual forms of the first deities resided. Egyptian tradition held that this underworld, created alongside water, earth, and sky, served as a hidden realm for the divine dead, anchored in the primordial land where creation began. This Edfu account thus encapsulates a cyclical view of life, death, and rebirth, with each period of creation setting the stage for subsequent existence. Through this lens, primeval islands' decay and resurrection reflect the natural order of Egyptian cosmology and the deep-rooted belief that even the earliest sacred domains could not escape the renewal cycle. The Edfu texts suggest a layered understanding of rebirth and renewal within the Island of Trampling through the re-emergence of ancient gods. The Edfu cosmogonical record begins with an allusion to the arrival of a divine being known as the Ka, who emerges from the depths of the reeds, symbolizing a spiritual form of the deceased Peon god. The depiction of this Ka resting on the Jed pillar likely represents the tangible form of the nameless Pen god, symbolizing the creator's spirit or life force that persists in the revived world. Furthermore, mentioning the flying Ba, arriving in tandem with the Ka, emphasizes the resurgence of the spirit and form of the Peon god, represented by the Ba and Ka on this revitalized island. This dual appearance reveals the belief that the deceased Peon god retained his presence in spirit form, while his Ka symbolized the physical connection with the earthly realm. After the Ka's arrival, another deity, the sanctified ruler, BSNTRI, comes forth. This deity is associated with Nefer Bear, an ancient falcon god, and the former protector of the island's Jed pillar. Although this deity does not actively participate in creating the world, he symbolizes the continuation of divine legacy, acting as a guardian for the remnants of the earlier sacred domains. The Ifeterbur deity is another figure from the prior era, present in spirit and symbolizing stability amidst the island's transformation. Although inanimate, Ifeterbur is a testament to the ancestors' continuous influence and the connection between the past and present realms, implying that he could also be considered an ancestral god who came back when the island's light returned. These deities, appearing in their spiritual forms and not as physical beings, are ancestors whose domain now resides in the reeds, which have become the ancestral ground, the field of reeds that restores the ancestors. The reed field symbolizes the perpetuation of ancient sacred sites, a domain that Egypt's divine lineage has preserved, and demonstrates the importance of the ancestors' territory in rejuvenating the Earth's creation. In the broader cosmological context, other Egyptian texts, like those at Karnak and Philae, echo this concept. These texts reference the SSST, W, the ground of the ancestors, and the sanctified territory of Ta, both the beginning of the earth and a burial site for Osiris, supporting the notion that ancestral lands are crucial for creation. Therefore, it is plausible to view the Jed pillar and the Earthmaker's enclosure as ancestral lands, underscoring the Egyptian view that the cycle of death and rebirth was foundational to creating new sacred domains. The names Type C, or ancestors, and JDW ghosts, which describe these spiritual beings, encapsulate their role as progenitors of the renewed world, existing in spirit to oversee the continued creation of new sacred sites. The reappearance of light on the island and the arrival of the Shebtu gods, who represent the next generation of creators and symbolize continuity and progression from the ancestral roots embedded in the island's reeds, initiate the second creation phase. Thus, the Edfu texts provide a unique insight into Egyptian cosmology by illustrating the cyclical process of decay, resurrection, and the enduring presence of the ancestors within the sacred ground. Every new creation honors the primordial forces that first shaped the island and, by extension, the world. The Edfu creation account reveals a layered cosmogony centered on resurrection, renewal, and continuity within sacred domains. Appearing after the initial creation had fallen into decay, the Shebtu clearly positioned themselves not as originators of the first island, but as agents in its second phase of creation, focused on the restoration and transformation of the earth. Unlike the organic, primordial creation, their role is inherently magical and transformative, setting them apart as catalysts for the island's rebirth. After emerging from the waters, the Shebtu established a new settlement on the GSW, RT, the marginal land of the island. Their foundational step signifies a shift from the dead state of the earlier domain to one capable of re-enlivenment. The description of the Shebtu as lords of the Island of Trampling indicates that they were now this space's active spiritual keepers, which had previously housed the Jed pillars and symbols of the Pen God's domain. The pivotal moment in the Shebtu's creative act is planting the Jebba perch, a symbolic act marking the resurrection of the old sacred domain. The Shebtu consciously erected the perch, a slip of reed, on the island's edge, reinforcing that this second act of creation was deliberate and ceremonial, rekindling the island's former sanctity. The uplifting power of the reed, or WJ's NTR, symbolically resurrected the Pin God's essence, transforming the once dead reed into a living monument of sacred continuity. The return of the ancestral spirits, the dirty falcons and the flying Ba, who come to guard and appoint a successor, the falcon, further symbolizes this revitalization. This return of the ancestors to the newly established Wetcheset Netter marks the beginning of the island's new era, bridging past and present in a sacred lineage. The Field of Reeds, acting as both the sacred birthplace and funerary ground of the original gods, retains central significance. It represents the ancestral territory that preserves and renews the spiritual legacy of the gods. The Edfu texts affirm that people viewed the field of reeds, with its djed pillars and association with the weak one, possibly the nameless Pian god, as a place of rebirth and the origin of all subsequent sacred domains. This revitalization of the island's sanctity led to the creation of a new sacred center, revered.Unlock, where the Shebtiu established a space for the new generation, ensuring the continuity of divine presence. This concept, deeply rooted in Egyptian cosmology, sees each sacred domain as arising from the spiritual foundations of the preceding realm. Through this lens, the Shebtiu's magical actions were not the creation of new life per se, but a recreation and reconsecration of what had once been, reinforcing a cycle of life, death, and resurrection that continues to sustain Egypt's mythical geography. The Edfu text frames this as a return to light, order, and sanctity in the domain of the gods, underpinned by a doctrine that conceives of Earth's creation as an eternal, cyclical process that is primarily concerned with the origin and renewal of terrestrial realms rather than animate beings. The creation myth in the Edfu records describes the origin of lands designated as sacred domains, centered on establishing the first sacred domain for the falcon on the Island of Trampling. This domain, known as revered.Unlock, was a revitalized space that arose from the creative actions of the Shebtiu, divine beings tasked with restoring the sacred essence of the island. Through their efforts, a new era emerged, transforming the primeval world of gods and creating the conditions for the falcon's arrival. Unlike the earlier deities, such as the Pian god or the Earthmaker, the falcon was a newcomer who embodied the essence of a new divine lineage on this sacred ground. The story portrays the falcon's arrival as a momentous event that awakened the remnants of the ancient divine order. He arrived in the land of an ancestral god who had once ruled over it, an unnamed deity with funerary connotations symbolized by the efforty falcons. This tradition held that the falcon's presence brought life and renewed purpose to a land that had been dormant, shifting it from a place of ancestral memory to a vibrant, new sacred domain.
Choice Hotels get you more of what you value. Here's a little tune to help you remember. Same drive, different day. Don't you wish you were getting away? Pack your bags and come on through. Texas, Ohio, Alaska, we're up there too. Comfort Inn, it's calling your name. Save on the stay. Oh, and free waffles are yours to claim. Well, I hope you like my little song. Book direct at choicehotels.com.
Spotify, it's Jay Shetty. Are you one of those media strategy people? Scrolling through spreadsheets, searching for an audience that pays twice as much attention to your ads than they do on social? Let me introduce you to Fans. And they're here with me on Spotify. Trust me, I know Fans. They don't skip, they stay for hours. They don't move on, they manifest. They're not a demographic group, they're fans.
Spotify advertising. You're among fans.
By occupying this consecrated territory, the falcon initiated a new tradition, the cult of the falcon, marking his first domain and seat of the first occasion. This account emphasizes the importance of ancestral continuity and renewal. The erection of the perch by the Shebtai was pivotal. It re-established the sanctity of the former domain, enabling the return of the efforty falcons and the spirit of the ancestors. The perch stood as a powerful symbol, embodying the resurgence of the sacred world and the falcon's new rule. The falcon's presence thus completed and sanctified the work of the Shebtiu, marking the beginning of a new sacred era and a phase in which the falcon would preside over a revitalized world of gods. The Edfu inscriptions exclusively record these beliefs, uniquely narrating the falcon's role in transforming the island's ancient domain into the foundation of a new holy world, where the ancestor gods and the legacy of the original creator spirits lived. In the Edfu creation story, the symbolic act of planting the perch establishes the falcon's initial sacred domain, the revered.Unlock. The text narrates the setting of a slip of reed, known as the Jeba, within a field of reeds on the marginal land of the Island of Trampling. Primeval waters surrounded this sacred place, the first resting place of the falcon, symbolically linking it to the former realm of the Jid pillars associated with the Pian god. The perch, located within the Wetcheset Neder, served as the successor to the Jid pillar, the sacred emblem of the previous deity, and marked the continuity of divine rule. The ancestral sanctity of the Field of Reeds resurrected this new sacred domain, embodying reverence for past deities in the present world. This resurrection was foundational, signifying the falcon's emergence as the ruler of the restored Holy Land and his new position among the ancestral gods, or Eferti falcons. The Shebtu deities, described as creators of magical capacity, played an essential role in this revival, symbolizing the beginning of a new phase of creation. Through their actions, they consecrated the perch as the focal point for the falcon's rule over the Wetcheset Neder, thus enabling a mystical union between the falcon and the soul of the Pian god. This union, known as consorting with the flying Ba, signified the falcon's establishment as the legitimate successor to the Pian god, continuing the divine legacy on the island. This act expanded the falcon's primeval domain, evolving beyond its ancestral foundations. The text describes how the island grew with the emergence of new lands, or Payland, as an extended territory of the sacred domain. People saw this as a mystical continuation of the Earth's original creation. The Shebtu's utterance of sacred names allowed this land to materialize from the waters, illustrating the belief that creating new sacred lands was a magical and symbolic process. Ultimately, the narrative in the Edfu records presents a layered understanding of creation, showing that the foundation of Falcon's cult was a process of renewal and transformation rooted in the sanctity of the past. The falcon's domain, Wetcheset Neder, stood as both a recreated ancestral site and the source of a burgeoning world, where each successive creation phase connected the living god with the echoes of divine predecessors, symbolizing a seamless continuity of Egyptian sacred tradition. The Edfu account describes the creation and extension of sacred lands around the original island of Trampling through significant actions, including the utterance of sacred names and the emergence of paylands, small plots of land believed to arise from divine magic rather than organic processes. The lands surrounding the island appear to stem from IBW fields, in which a great inundation once flowed, symbolizing the revivification of the primeval waters. The Shebtu greeted the falcon, a newly appointed deity, as he established his divine seat, believed to be a DBL perch, by uttering sacred names that gave rise to additional paylands. The Ka, an ancestral spirit who revealed secret knowledge, fortified the falcon's position by suggesting that the falcon's domain was a continuation and transformation of ancestral lands. The reanimation of remnants of an ancient world occurred through magical utterances rather than the creation of new lands. Egyptian cosmogony reflects this process, illustrating the belief that the foundation ground of the sacred domains relied on the reconstitution of pre-existing holy lands rather than the creation of something entirely new. In the following stages of creation, another essential element, the BCYWR, or Great Primeval Mound, emerged, regarded as the territory of the ancestor. The mound played a significant role in neutralizing threats to the divine order, represented by the falcon's enemies. The protector god, Ifn-NTR, an enigmatic figure associated with defense, appeared from the mound to safeguard the falcon. Believed to resemble the J, another powerful ancestral deity, the Ifn-NTR may have represented a protective force rooted in the mound's spiritual energy. As divine overseers of the recreated land, these gods embodied powers essential to establishing and guarding the burgeoning divine order within the sacred lands. This narrative also introduces the god of the temple, or Pabanwit, a creative force thought to be related to the J. He was responsible for carrying out additional divine tasks, including safeguarding the falco. He constructed an enclosure around the falcon's perch to further secure his dominion, symbolizing a sacred barrier. A new type of water, known as MW water, emerged, distinct from the primeval water, indicating a transformation of elemental forces within the island. These actions collectively demonstrated a complex blend of ancestral continuity, divine magic, and sacred guardianship, establishing the Wet'suset as the falcon's original domain. It was based on a cycle of death, rebirth, and the protective return of ancestral powers. The Edfu mythological narrative attributes the MW water surrounding the falcon's domain to the deity Enter-Ib, also known as the Divine of Heart. This Mbu water, sanctified against evil, is believed to have a protective quality that prevents a snake from encroaching upon the falcon's sacred falcon. Without providing specific details of its creation, the narrative suggests that this water functioned as a barrier, akin to a protective channel later incorporated into the design of many sacred sites in Egypt. Following the creation of the bit enclosure around the falcon's perch, which the MW water likely surrounded, the Edfu account describes the development of the first sacred enclosure. This bit enclosure is considered one of Egypt's earliest constructed protective barriers, albeit a simple fence fashioned from light materials like reeds. Its creation was symbolically equivalent to the previous acts of creation within the narrative, emphasizing its significance in the protection and sanctification of the divine space. This myth portrays the Shebtu creators as the primary agents in constructing this enclosure. They entrust the safety and sanctity of the falcon's domain, the falcon's divine of heart, to their guiding figure. This narrative culminates in constructing the bit enclosure and excavating the surrounding channel, which serve as physical and symbolic defenses for the domain. Instead of building the bit enclosure on the newly created paylands, the original Wet'suset Nader domain served as its foundation. This domain, located within a field of reeds, reflects a unique aspect of early Egyptian belief in recreating and revivifying ancestral lands rather than creating entirely new ones. Within this narrative framework, Tannin, the Lord of Creation, emerges as another protector of the divine lands. After his appearance, the Shebtu erected a night shelter, a structure of 5 by 15 cubits, around sacred symbols. This shelter is the first physical manifestation of a constructed sacred space within the story and offers a glimpse into the layout and dimensions of early cultic sites. The narrative then transitions to a second part that appears ideologically distinct, yet related, focusing on recreating the earth god's domain. A primordial snake destroys and reconstructs this domain, named the Mansion of Isden. The previous creation of the perch mirrors the Prechistoration Act, but the Mansion of Isden introduces a more developed and refined sacred space. Tannin bestows sacred emblems and symbols upon the falcon at this mansion, which the Shebtu assist in reconstructing. Through this ritual, the falcon symbolically succeeds the earth god, inheriting the divine authority and power associated with the mansion. This narrative illustrates the intricate and multi-layered Egyptian conception of creation, which establishes sanctified spaces not through spontaneous generation, but through the revival and transformation of ancient realms. The description of the Mansion of Isden, with its protective enclosure and ceremonial symbols, highlights the Egyptian emphasis on reanimation and ancestral legacy. The juxtaposition of these two traditions within the Edfu texts, the reconstruction of the domain of the DD pillars and the revival of the Mansion of Isden, illustrates two ideologically parallel but distinct stories. Both underscore the Wet'suset Nader as a primordial realm steeped in ancestral significance, and suggest that early Egyptian sacred spaces were often viewed as renewed versions of earlier, sanctified places. These ancient traditions rooted the falcon's sanctified extension of the earth god's realm. Separate creator and protector gods like Tannin and the Divine of Heart reside in these holy lands, suggesting that a series of intentional acts meant to uphold the divine order set up in mythical times made them holy. The Edfu myth states that in the fifth phase of the falcon's primeval, a new stage of land creation begins, branching from the Mansion of Isden. However, this process marks a notable shift. Unlike earlier phases, the god of the temple takes a directive role, summoning the Shebtu and instructing them in the creative process. This marks a divergence from previous accounts, where the god of the temple did not play a role in creating the Paylands. This difference suggests that this account originates from a distinct tradition, likely adapted later to explain the falcon's evolution. Although details of the instructions remain mysterious and lack parallel explanations in other Egyptian texts, they imply a rite of creation focused on the symbol of the arm, representing the creator's power. Upon entering the BWHNM site, the Shebtu invokes the arm through the praise of Ariki, seemingly activating the creative process. This worship seems integral to the emergence of new lands, known as playlands, that form around Wechiset Neter and the mansion of the earth god. Through this adoration, the Shebtu effectively summon these new lands from the waters surrounding the island. The narrative provides greater insight into this act than previous myths, detailing a naming ceremony, wherein the Shebtu declare the names of IBT or sacred substances. The naming of these substances, likely symbols of the lands to be created, is believed to endow them with the necessary power for emergence. This use of sacred names underscores a belief in the transformative power of language in creation, suggesting that the Shebtu's words cause these lands to rise from beneath the waters. In this sixth phase of the creation narrative, the Bay Wayar, or Great Primeval Mound, emerges, symbolizing another significant stage in the development of Falcon's domain. Falcon's little tradition surrounds this mound. It reinforces the layered progression of creation, with new lands originating as extensions of earlier sacred sites, forming multiple tiers within Falcon's realm. Falcon's narrative then shifts to a seventh phase, where it returns to the original island, specifically the BWHNM, in an act known as BBWHNM, or visiting the BWHNM. Though the purpose and exact nature of the BWHNM remains ambiguous, it is believed to be either a wellspring or a source of water associated with creative powers. This sacred site, described without reeds but centered on a willow, hints at an earlier mythological layer. The narrative positions this area as a distinct sacred zone within the island, one not directly tied to the field of reeds. The willow serves as the primary sacred emblem here, providing a focal point for the place of the throne, or BWBMR, which is believed to be constructed around it. The image of a tree by a well is reminiscent of early Egyptian sacred spaces, where it is believed that primordial creative forces may reside within the branches of trees. When the Shebtu arrives, Tannin, a deity of the earth, reveals himself, potentially hinting at his origin from this well. Tannin and the Shebtu initiate the sacred act of creating and consecrating this new domain. In a ritual act mirroring those in previous phases, CAA, one of the Shebtu W, pronounces sacred names, thereby establishing the place of the throne. The introduction of additional builder gods here suggests that the BWHNM marks another phase in the falcon's expansion. Once the falcon arrives at his seat within the willow, this act reawakens the sacred nature of the domain. The willow grows radiant, symbolizing resurrection, a powerful motif across the Edfu records. The arm also reappears here, potentially already embedded within the land as a symbol of creative power. Its presence underscores the recurring belief that an ancestral power within the land allows for the revival of sacred space. As with previous episodes, the night shelter appears, signifying the sacred spot around the falcon's seat, flanked by the deities SBMBR and IFDWR, who provide protection. This myth of the willow and the BWHNM exemplifies a common narrative arc across Edfu's myths, revitalizing a prior sacred site. Each version of the creation story offers a unique sacred element, a perch, a mansion, and now, a willow, demonstrating the Egyptian theme of recreation based on existing primordial sites. This parallelism suggests that various Egyptian cultic contexts likely applied the myth, explaining the falcon's cultus and connecting it to ancient sacred traditions. Thus, the myth illustrates the Egyptian perspective on sacred sites as realms of enduring significance, renewed across ages and imbued with the power of their ancestral foundation. Upon recreation of this domain, the falcon regained its rulership. Here, we encounter the familiar creative forces, Tannin and the two Sheptiu, and the protecting deities from previous stages in this domain's existence. However, the processes that transformed the place of the throne into a sacred domain of the falcon do not involve any other significant deities from the previous episodes, such as the Peen god, the Ka, or the god of the temple. This absence strongly suggests the presence of a distinct myth, unique to this episode, concerning the creation and recreation of a sacred place within the island during the primal age of the gods. The narrative surrounding the willow further supports this notion of the episode as one of restoration and reconsecration. The willow grows verdant again after several ceremonial acts under its branches, implying that these ceremonies breathed new life into it. The revived state of the willow is a direct allusion to the concept of revivification, a renewal of something that had decayed. This regeneration mirrors the Wet'suset Neter, as it served as the nucleus for further expansions of the falcon's domain, forming a foundation from which other lands for sacred purposes would later emerge. In this eighth and final phase of falcon's primary creation, two playlands are Wet'suset Neter and Jeba. While these names echo those of the original domain on the island, they do not appear in the earlier lists of paylands. This could be a coincidence, or it could indicate that the names of these new lands specifically pay homage to the sacred site where the falcon's cult established itself. Details about the origin of the playland of Wet'suset Neter provide insight into the Egyptian understanding of the formation of lands adjacent to the island. The Sheptiu convened in a space known as the BW-Ibt, the place where the Earth's substances were endowed with power. Despite lacking a visual description, this place appears crucial to the Egyptian creation rites. Previous instances of payland creation do not reference this location, suggesting it played a unique role during this phase. We might infer it was a specific area within a restored sacred space, possibly serving as a repository. Alternatively, it could have been a place to store and empower the essential creative substances. If this interpretation is correct, it would mean that only a previously destroyed space could be the focal point for a new act of creation. The act of revivification endowed such a place with the potential to generate new lands. This implies that the BW-Ibt, it might be synonymous with the place of the throne where the falcon's domain is. If the BW-Ibt, it is another name for the BWH. It underscores the notion that this location, believed to house the primary creative force, was crucial for empowering Earth's substances. The Egyptians viewed this ancestral spot as the real center of Earth's creation, where its fundamental substances gained life and power. This final phase, a magical act of creation, offers some of the most compelling evidence from the Edfu texts about Egyptian beliefs regarding the formation of the land. The creation accounts explicitly define the IBT as the substances of the earth, thereby reinforcing their role as symbolic representations of the lands under creation. Through sacred spells and rites, the Sheptiu appeared to gradually cause the surrounding water to recede, revealing the playland. This retreat of the waters illustrates a view of land creation as the mere emergence of the plots of land from none. The playland emerged at a location known as BWBBB, which may signify the place of the primeval water. This site, situated along the land's margin, was associated with the growth of reeds. The Sheptiu likely invoked further spells here, initiating the appearance of the letter Bur, an image or deity that accompanied the procession to a designated area within the playland. The description compares this special place, known as the BW2D, to the original location of the Jeba perch on the island. The DD pillar does not seem to exist as a physical object in this setting, but rather functions as a relic that imparts sanctity to the spot where the falcon's perch would be erected, linking it back to the primal sacred domain. Like establishing the first Wet'suset Neter on the island's marginal lands, this new perch elevates Perchalcon and the best falcon named Wet'suset Neter upon the playland. The This new domain mirrors the sacred acts that brought the original land into being. The rites that initiate sacred life in this newly emerged payland are replicated from those that established the original domain. The origin of Jaba, the other payland, enriches our understanding of the falcon's primary territories. This second account is more detailed and reflects a cyclical creation motif. Here, we repeat the actions that initially formed Wedgeset. Following these reenactments, the crew of the falcon greets the falconer, and God recounts how the lands and domains came into existence. The reed, described as the reed that restores the place of the DD pillar, reappears as a symbol in this narrative. The Shebtu, upon arriving in the field of reeds, perform a rite of adoration directed at the DD pillar of the Ka, leading to a revelation from the Ka, who instructs them on how to establish the perch. Here, as Perchter accounts, the creation of the perch signifies the preservation of the playland's sacred essence. Planting the perch where the perch pillar once stood is a foundational act, reinforcing that the perch, as a symbol of the revived sanctity, is central to the falcon's resting place. In another part of the account, the Shebtu stand on the land's edge, dividing the floating reeds and planting a slip, which becomes the falcon's seat. This ceremonial act sanctifies the land and elevates the falcon once more. It clarifies the establishment of Wedgeset as a sacred domain. Following this, a silent rite further blesses the site, though the exact nature of this ritual is unclear. The text then ambiguously alludes to a protecting power adored and invoked to safeguard the perch. The Divi perch heart may reappear as the overseer of a specific image in the playland, possibly serving as an emblem of protection. This reference to the divine of heart is notable, as it reestablishes its connection to the previously mentioned entity during the Shebtiw's emergence on the island's periphery. This deity's return at the final stage of the falcon's domain implies a continuous influence, suggesting that the divine of heart assumed a protective role in the new domain, akin to Letterbear in Wedgeset. At this juncture, the Edfu texts conclude the creation account of the lands dedicated to the falcon's domain. These records show a coherent sequence depicting the gradual formation of a sacred world for the falcon. Ultimate Falcon. His realm replaced the homeland of the Primordial gods and the cult site of the creator. The Edfu texts imply that the formation of the falcon's domain was not instantaneous, but rather the outcome of 8 successive stages, each building upon the restoration of an earlier sacred site. Each stage brought forth new lands, incrementally enlarging the falcon's realm and the sacred world for a god seen as the creator's successor. Each act of creation followed a similar process. The new land, emerging on the island's margin, was first brought to life and then sanctified by establishing a perch based on a pre-existing ERDD pillar or relic of the previous domain. This consistent method symbolized the belief that all sacred lands owed their sanctity to what had come before. The falcon's uplift symbolizes the sacral nature of his seat, a manifestation of the land's renewed sanctity. In essence, these records recount 3 distinct beginnings of the falcon's cultus, rooted in the revival of a prior domain with a unique structure, whether the domain of the DD pillars, the mansion of the Earthmaker, or the willow-centered by-enclosure. However, the domain of the DRT falcons appears to be the most fundamental to the falcon's establishment. Initially, a single myth about restoring a lost sacred domain became the basis for creating the New World, evolving into a unified history of Falcon's domain and Falcon's Edfu records. Through these 3 eras of Payland creation, each originating from a central sacred place, we see the Falcon's early falconcy, comprising 3 distinct zones, later recognized as sacred mounds. These records offer a glimpse of the ancient sacred landscape that Egyptians believed had emerged through stages of creation, each originating from the original island's ancestral cult places. The Edfu texts emphasize that before the later historical domains existed, there were primal centers dedicated to ancestor worship, which served as the foundation for Egypt's sacred.
Meet the new iSIMS, the single talent acquisition platform that's fully future-ready. It works wherever and however you hire, with insights no one else offers. One solution that fits seamlessly into your existing tech stack, which is why IT and HR leaders trust it. With the best of enterprise-grade software and AI, iSIMS helps you identify and secure the right talent faster. iSIMS, powering exceptional hiring. Learn more at isims.com.
Geography.